So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then, we can understand the time of the end. As per Yirmiyahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. As we read then Yirmiyahu the prophet, we find then the layers regarding then the time of Yirmiyahu himself during the period of time of the King Hezekiah. We then read the reasons why then Yirmiyahu the prophet was destroyed. Most often, Israel had destroyed its own prophets. And then we must ask during these times, why then there are so many reasons for us so you can believe this factor. The prophets of the great Creator won't ever be in line with the spirit of this world. This truly is a plain truth. And then each of us must face either we are going to become productive or we are lining up ourselves with the world and being destroyed with it. So then, understandably, Yirmiyahu the prophet was prophesying many centuries in the future, and as we relate during our time, we are speaking of roughly 700 years prior of the birth of the Messiah, and then another 2,000 years at least, making it 2,700 years ago. Then, because of this great amount of time, we wonder, are the instructions truly true? Or it was then truly what was spoken? Can we believe and trust during these times? So each of us must answer this question and read what Yirmiyahu has said. As far as we can read from the Holy Instructions, from Leviticus the 23rd chapter, we read then sections of Galah, explaining then the merchants of the earth. So let's try to understand a factor. The Messiah no longer is explaining the nations of the world or the kingdoms of the world. He's explaining of merchants of the earth. Now we must understand a factor. The merchants of the earth, as we read the future from what then Yohanan saw, he saw the merchants of the earth in charge of the world's politics. In other words, the world then is run by trade, and politicians are then secondary. So let's make this very clear, because the merchants are not going to take over governments, but because of taxes, they are going to obviously become in the forward area of what's coming then in the trade of this world. Because of these, what can we then read from the Holy Instructions giving us some indications of these true? Then Yirmiyahu the 23rd chapter, we find then these situation very true. Let's read then these factors so then we can understand where Yirmiyahu is coming from. Then he is explaining 23rd chapter of Yirmiyahu the prophet, and the merchants of the earth are the chief traders, and they are weighty on the earth. Weighty simply means their decisions are very important. And then Yahweh himself of hosts purposed it, to stain the pride and the glory, making it into a contempt. As far as we can understand, then the governance of this world. So why he's doing this for? It is very simple. Because of the history of Abraham and his sons. As we can understand, the Creator himself disliked governments other than his own. In fact, when Samuel was then in charge of the nation of Israel, and then Israel wanted to have a king, the Creator was very displeased. So the government is a factor where then the Creator himself dislikes. Simply because governments, they have no capability of understanding justice. While then prophets, when they are spoken of on behalf of the Creator, they always explains areas of justice. So then, because of these, we understand why then the freighters of the earth must be in charge. And they are. Another factor is reading, for instance, Galah, or Revelation. Let's then read a section of it. It explains what the Messiah then was given Yohanan. Then we explain, and the merchants of the earth will mourn over her, because no one purchases their cargo, no more the cargo of gold, silver, precious stones, ivory, precious ointments, and iron, and myrrh, and flour, and wheat, and beasts of burden, horses, and chariots, and bodies, and even souls of men. And there is a huge, big list of these situations. So then, why then the nations of the world are trying to extend the 1,000 years of deceit? Why then the governments don't understand the importance of the merchants of the earth? Because it's no longer a choice of either implementing or extending governments versus then implementing e-trade or then the merchants of the future. Is a factor of the Creator himself has set for this age, and no person can change it. So then, because of the incompetence of governments, and because of the fact the Creator of the heaven and the earth, he does not like governments, because he himself has explained he wants then his own nation governed by a prophet. Now, if he has then chosen a nation for himself, explaining the way he is, obviously, as far as the governments of the Gentiles, he won't like other governments either. But what is then the way out is simply understanding trade, understanding merchantships, understanding then what is coming as far as taxes are concerned. So the Creator has made in such a way where then, even though there are a few governments in the world who are going then to become dependent on freighters, there is no way in this earth the governments can become independent from the system of trading and the merchants. That's why then the Creator himself has revealed to his Son, and his Son in turn revealed to Yohanan. So then we can understand Galah, Revelation, and we can understand Yirmiyahu the prophet. We can understand then Daniel. And these layers are obviously pointing to what is coming then in the future. Now, if the nations are trying to come up with some sort of a government of their own, where then these governments thinking on staying above the merchants, then they are sadly mistaken. The merchants of the earth are going to become the very ways of new types of led government. And the regular governments, as we know of, are going to become secondary. because these governments are dependent upon taxes used by the merchants. And the new system, as it becomes more and more developed, as people are then buying and purchasing and investing on products via online and receiving and sending funding. Bear in mind that people can have 24 digits in their bank, where then they can understand simply Bitcoin and other virtual systems. They can have lots of money over there and not paying then a cent in taxes, because there is no way of charging taxes yet from those systems. China, however, has the best of the entire situation, because as the computers of the world are linked with the Bank of China, they can do many trades, and yet nations where those computers are at are not set yet for charging taxes. Now, there are some points where then in China itself, when the particular money is used, then they can deduct the taxes during the time of the purchase, when there is a link with the central bank of the country requesting the product. Now, if you were speaking of situations related with private financial institutions such as Bitcoin, where there is not a link with the central bank, how they are going to charge for taxes? That's why then the new system has a situation related with a portion of this system not linked with local central banks, thus making the governments dependent upon the system of the freighters, so then taxes can be then charged. And this very system we find then when Yohanan explains in Galah, and the merchants of the earth, and then you read also in Yirmiyahu, the 23rd chapter, and the merchants of the earth, their decisions are weighty, their decisions are important, because obviously they are providing governments with taxes. So what does it say? The future system of e-trade won't be lined up with the central banks, obviously. Because if it is, then there is not a reason why to place then the merchants in front. But rather than the Messiah would say, and the nations then doing trade other than the merchants themselves. And because China is always ahead of the game as far as softwares and purchasing and sending and investing via their own system, you find that in China where they purchased 25% of 197 of India, where they use these for payments of utilities, groceries, and you name it. So China is already linking up the world with its own system. But China has an advantage. China has a system where then when computers are linked with China's bank directly, then there is not a link with local central banks. That's why then when the Messiah reads, and the merchants of the earth, it's because there is a lack of linkages from the new system with China. Thus the Dragonic period. So then, because of these, let's read then once again what Yohanan then saw. He saw then the merchants of the earth. He saw then what Daniel had already explained centuries earlier, and knowledge shall increase, not for the purposes of medicine, not for the purposes of any other area of knowledge, but because of trade, because Daniel was speaking from a standpoint of a financial minister. When we read then the future, then you find the linkages must yet be established. Now, how can a nation establish a link with China in virtual systems? That's where then we find these areas extremely important, because what is coming in the future is absolutely overwhelming. And the nations are wallowing around in their own problems. They think they can't come up with some sort of a system of their own, and they can't. The Creator during this time of the restoration period has not given the luxury of any nation coming up with an idea or a system other than what then His servant Yohanan warned and explained. So then, whatsoever we find as far as e-trade must be linked with the system of China. Now, nations can try to go against it. Nations can try to destroy the prophets, as Israel did. They can destroy people. However, they can't destroy an order given by the Creator Himself. Yet they destroy the prophets. The records are showing the precise steps of formation taking place as the Creator said. And the point is, the Messiah said those people who are not bearing fruit, when those people are not galad or revealed, obviously people are not saved. And try to remind yourselves, during the time of Yeshayahu, the entire nation of Israel and the entire generation of the time of Yeshayahu, they went straight down to the inferno, Sheol. Their souls are in torment ever since that time until this age ends. So as this generation is going to be done away with, as it was during the time of Yeshayahu, as it was during the time of the Messiah, and no person came from Sheol other than the Messiah himself, and he warned, and the prophets warned. So then is truly the decision of nations: either they can overwhelm themselves in the future, or they can start working seriously in the next couple of years. Because nations can stand behind and try to hide behind war and try to come up with the heroes of some sort of a diplomatic solution. So then, let's understand a factor. The Soviet Union is the kingdom of the North. China is the kingdom of the East. Africa is the kingdom of the South. We have then these prophecies, the substance of these prophecies themselves that already taking place, and we have the reflections thereof. We are during the time of the reflections of the substances of these prophecies that already had taken place. Now, if you are a governor, a president, and you never read the holy instructions, and when you do, you read some sort of a junky Greco-Roman translation, you won't ever understand. But the answer is given as far as what's coming in the future, and the new system, and the new trade of China. If nations are not linked with China properly and its system, later on they won't be able to gather taxes. So then, what is the important regarding this? What is the important factor? The importance is, as the freighters of the earth can land their data gathering system, so the nations then must link up their governments with these data. So then, during the time of a purchase, when it is used a monetary system other than those who are already linked with central banks, they have a way of charging taxes. And you can be sure of it, Most of the nations of the world are doing a very bad job with the governance, and people will to do whatsoever they can get their hands on to become part of a system not linked with their central banks. So then, you understand why. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.